Today we're talking about setting, and to help me with that, I invited my author friend Leenna Naidoo. So, Leenna, welcome and thank you for taking the time to chat to me.
Thanks. It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So, first off, just tell us a bit about yourself, what motivated you to write, and then also the type of books that you write.
Okay, so I'm a fiction author based in Durban, South Africa. That's on the North Coast. And as for what motivated to take up writing, um, I feel it's in my DNA. It's all I've ever wanted to be. So yeah, it's all I've worked to be. All that I've worked towards to be. Um, I write suspense, romance, adventure, mystery, fantasy, science fantasy, and sometimes light science fiction, and sometimes they're all mixed together. So just basically whatever I feel like writing at the time.
Okay, great. Do you have some of your books to show us?
Yes, I do. So this is Situation No Win, which is my newest release. We've also got Settle Down Now. This is set in South Africa. And and we've also got 3 Million's a Crowd. This is a novella, and No Distance to Run. This was my first novel, and it's entirely in South Africa, but kind of like all over the place. And then we'll talk about that later. I'll tell you about my newest project.
Okay, great. So we're talking about setting, and I mean, maybe you can just explain, why is setting so important to any kind of story that you as an author are trying to tell?
Well, it's vitally important because it sets context, it creates authenticity,
Hmm.
it imparts a uniqueness to your story, but it also stimulates your readers of their curiosity, and it also satisfies their curiosity. And I think that would be the difference between setting your story in, say, Durban or setting it in Johannesburg, because that's not going to be the same story.
Hmm. Okay, and I think you mentioned that a couple of your books are set in South Africa. In which part of South Africa would that be?
Mostly in Durban and Joburg, because that's what I'm most familiar with.
Hmm.
No Distance to Run is actually about a road trip that starts in Johannesburg. It goes down to Grahamstown, to Kimberley, across to Clarence, and then down on the N3 to Durban, and then back again. And Settle Down Now is set mostly in Durban, as well as on the Indian Ocean. So yeah, it's important, I think, to also give people a feel of the country that you're most familiar with.
Yeah, I think that is very, very interesting, and, when you talk about taking a trip, to Durban, I remember the first time that I went to the coast, it was to Durban. We took a road trip, and, in those days, you stopped along the road to have your picnic. That was before, we had these big places that you can stop, so
Yeah,
it is quite interesting, and I think it also creates a lot of memories. You know,
it
um,
does,
yeah.
because an expat who read No Distance to Run recently was saying how it just was such a nostalgic reading for her because it's set mostly in like pre 2010,
Hmm.
and it just reminded her of traveling around the country and staying at friends of friends and things like that, because that's what you did, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, I've read a few of your books. I read the one that was set in Scotland, which I enjoyed because I felt like there you really brought out, the way people speak, and the different sort of like landmarks in Scotland. It actually made me feel that I was there. But what I want to talk about is your most recent book, which is The Situation No Win, which is set primarily set in China. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the story is about, and then what kind of research went into creating such an authentic setting? Because I really felt like I was there as I was reading the story.
Thank you. I'm glad that it was such a good read for you. So, Situational Win is basically about Tom, and he and his friend Lou have discovered this ancient relic on an archaeological site, but it has these really awesome powers that they have to keep secret, except the secret gets out and people start dying and people start trying to get a hold of the relic. So it's all about Tom's race to ensure the safety of the relic, as well as to try to find someone he can trust. And that's when Melissa comes in. So it's a mostly an adventure thriller, as well as a bit of a romance thrown. Well, it's quite a bigger romance thrown in, but it's kind of like well, I think you compared it to Indiana Jones, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, yeah, that's a pretty good way of looking at it. So as
Yes.
for the research, it's kind of hard looking back, because one of the reasons I was able to bring in so much of the setting was because I was actually teaching English in Yulin in Shanxi province at the time, which
Mhm.
is where most of the book is set. Actually, it's set just outside Yulin in the Mu Desert, which is a desert that stretches from I'm not sure exactly where, but it basically ends in Erdos in Inner Mongolia, and it's a full of ancient history. You know, it's got the part of the Great Wall, and it's also was part of the Silk Road. So, being a bit of a history fanatic, I was already reading up on the region before I went there, and being there just put certain things into context. But also being there, I got to know the people, a bit about their culture, about their sense of humor. But mostly I got to explore the area from Yulin to Shenmue and onto Erdos,
Mhm.
which is all part of the book, as well as traveling to and from Beijing on trains and things like that. That is something that I often did. And so basically, I was semi-local for a while, and that was a big plus of making things authentic. So in addition, especially on the historical side, I visited museums, the Shanxi History Museum, as well as the museum in Erdos. I read a lot of Wikipedia and other history articles, and things like ancient, I can't remember what it is. I think it's called Ancient History, the website.
Mhm.
And I also asked a lot of questions locally about certain traditions. And once people got to know that I was interested in Emperor Qin and stuff like that, they would start telling me stuff that you couldn't always find online, like the story about Emperor Qin and the alien, which isn't there and has nothing to do with the book, but it was really good to know. So basically, I took a shortcut in writing um, something that I was already interested in and had already read a lot about in terms of the history and the trade route. And yeah, I just drew a lot from action movies as well.
So, how important is accuracy when it comes to creating like a feel for the place that you where your story is set in?
Well, I think it depends on the story and how much is set in how big an area. If you have it in one tiny room, I suppose you could get away with a lot of details because it's going to be focused mostly on that action in the room or those characters and how they relate. But if you start to take it outside, then all the little details start to matter. For example, in Situation No Win, we have the KFC menu, which, unlike the South African menu, had things like soup in it, and I think there was breakfast porridge. You could also have fish burgers. So it wasn't your typical KFC menu, and the things like that you can slip up on. And also in No Distance to Run, let me just see if I can find it. I mentioned the camera obscura, which is I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if there's one part, one scene that's dependent on her seeing someone through the camera obscura.
Mhm.
So little details like that, it's hard to know if you haven't actually been there yourself. So yes, food, weather, geography, but mostly the culture, how locals speak, and how they'll respond to your characters and whatever's going on in the plot. That's all very important. But I think especially it's important not to sound like a travel blog.
Mhm.
And it's often the things we take for granted or find mundane that can be the most exotic to readers and travelers. For
Yeah.
example, the one beta reader for Situation No Win found it strange that the sleeper compartments in China aren't gender specific. So that was like, it's always kind of weird what people find interesting and what people find very unusual.
But I mean, I really love the way that you describe the place, and even that those train trips, that your characters took. I had no problem with, sort of like the sleeper couches or anything like that, but I really felt like I was on that train, because of
Hmm.
the way you described it, the food that they were eating, the the smells, and sort of like the things that they felt, and I mean, would you say that those elements are very important in trying to portray a setting?
I think they are, but they shouldn't overpower your characters and they shouldn't overpower the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an editor for myths and legends and fairy tales at Cosmic Roots and Eldritch Shores, we do get some really great stories, but they're so bogged down in the details. They
Mm-hmm.
get so poetic about the sights and smells and that it just bogs down the story. So I think if you can find a balance between that, adding just enough detail to make it grounded
Mm-hmm.
and evoke whatever you're trying to bring in, like naturally, like don't go out of your way to have them eat a meal if it's not going to be natural to where they are and what they're doing, if
Yeah.
you see what I mean. And in
Yeah,
fact, a lot of the time I added the food scenes because it just made talking easier.
yeah, we tend to talk when we eat, and that, I mean, that creates a more natural kind of feel to your
It
story
does, yeah.
as well. So let's talk about the process. So how do you go about putting things together when it comes to setting? Do you create like a specific file with photos or do you watch videos, to remind yourself of certain places, as you write?
Well, I prefer visiting a place or writing about places that I'm quite familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So with Situation No Win, as well as Settle Down Now, it worked really, really well as the same for No Distance to Run. But with 3 Millions a Crowd, the story actually called for them to visit places that were nearby, but not exactly that I wasn't exactly familiar with. So an area north of Perth and the southern part of the Namibian coastline. So although I've been to Swakopmund, I haven't been to the Orange River area,
Mm-hmm.
which is where the story is set. So I had to sort of extrapolate what I knew of the area, as well as go to Google Earth and to ask people who've actually traveled there if it sounded authentic, to you know get that sense of authenticity there. So I also read a lot of online articles and magazines like National Geographic when I can.
Mm-hmm.
Are extremely helpful because they don't tell you only the touristy things, which I think is important if you're writing the setting as someone's home or as something other than just a whistle stop for someone. Videos are helpful, but they can be very misleading for the same reason that a lot of the stuff we see on YouTube is made specifically to one narrative, to one advert for
Mm-hmm.
something or someone. So, and also when it is more factual, I very seldom find travel bloggers agreeing on the cost of living or the quality of life in certain countries.
Yeah.
I sometimes use photos, but not as much as use movies and music, because I feel
Hmm.
movies and music gives you a better sense of the culture and of regions within countries. If you're lucky enough to find a movie or something from there.
And what are some mistakes to avoid when writing about a place that you've never been to?
So extrapolating too much from videos and photos,
Hmm.
um, and assuming that familiar franchises and items are the same the world over, like the KFC or certain cars. We call them, like the Astra in South Africa is called something else in the UK.
Hmm.
Um, I can't remember the name now, but it's not an Opel. They have another name for it. So getting those little things right can often set settings very well, and it's also glaring mistakes
Hmm.
if you don't get those right. So one of I started writing the story set in Scandinavia and got quite far into it, and I really like it, but I also got stuck because I realized that in the rewrite that I couldn't get the cafe scene right because I didn't know for sure what the small town menu in that region looked like, or what it would taste like, or what the character's reaction to it would be. Also, using language that, I mean, it's very similar to the car. Using language that isn't authentic to the locals is a very obvious mistake, especially if you're writing about the UK. The regional dialects can change so much,
Hmm.
and even in certain parts of Australia. So if you're writing an Australian character, you can't really have them use South African language in the same way that we use it. They'll probably get some things wrong. And there's some Australian words that are just very, very different anyway. And finally, another big thing is not being aware of cultural sensitivities and political sensitivities in the region that you're writing in. And that was a huge point that my Scandinavian story fell down in, because of the cultural sensitivities.
So in a way, I think for you as a writer, or what would help a writer is to sort of stick to the what because that is the best way for you to get it right.
It is, unless you're writing something like science fiction and fantasy. So fantasy is more forgiving because you can pretty much put anything you like and make it work within something that's believable in your world building. But and with science fiction, it's a bit trickier. So, for example, when I was writing Here Be Monsters, which is a short novella, it's set in Mars in the near future. So, what I used to sort of get a sense of setting for the caves, well, the corridors that they were in, was the mines in South Africa that I visited, because
Hmm.
it should be pretty similar. It should be.
Well, I can certainly say that setting is a very interesting, very important, but it can also be very interesting process as part of the writing, and also I think a lot of fun, So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
Okay, so what are your plans for 2021?
So I started the serial, The Trials of Ryan Ramirez,
Hmm.
which is set in the same region as Situation No Win. It's also set in the Mu Desert, but
Hmm.
this is more of a fantasy. And I'm not used to writing serials, so it's proving quite challenging. But what I'm trying to do is to bring in some of the elements from Situation No Win as well, and then to leave the door open for other works that I had planned but haven't moved into, that maybe I'll write some other day. I also want to write two short stories for the Settle Down Now series that follows some of the princes that didn't win Charmaine's hands. But what I'm most interested in at the moment is a fantasy inspired by Alan Dean Foster's Spellsinger and Diana Wynne Jones's Tough Guide to Fantasyland. And I think um, that could be a lot of fun because it could bring a lot of humor into it. And I think I need to write something super funny, if only for myself. So, and then I'd like to write about dogs as characters because they're just a lot of fun. So I'm gonna try and write more fun stuff this year. But I can't stay away from the romance and action, so I'll be doing that as well.
Well, that certainly sounds like a lot of fun, and I must say that I take my hat off to you for writing fantasy, for writing science fiction, and also for wanting to add some humor into your writing, because I think that's a whole different story, when it comes to putting humor in the story. But I want to thank you so much, for taking the time to talk to me about the process of setting and what goes into it, and the kind of things to avoid. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm going to put all the details, about your books and how to find out more about Leenna in the description of this video. But for now, I want to say, Leenna, thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and in a few months' time, we'll talk about the humorous writing that you've done.
That sounds like fun. Thank you so much, Vida. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about settings, and I hope it's going to be a lot of help to other writers or people interested in writing as well. Thank you
Uh,
so much.
no, I'm sure it will be. Take care.